Anatara story. So our first speaker spoke about the cloud, and certainly Anatara uses the cloud in our IT system, but our intention is to go to the stratosphere. The reason for that will hopefully become apparent through the presentation. So if you go back and look at fiction, there was a whole series of bestseller books and subsequent movies made around the issue of the rise of what I would call, or a lot of people call, superbugs. So through the development of antibiotics in particular, and a number of other chemicals, but particularly antibiotics, we've created a firestorm for humankind going forward. In fact, I would argue, apart from Donald Trump and North Korea, the biggest issue facing mankind going forward, and I've got some data to back this up, this is not just rhetoric. The fact of the matter is, it's a bit like Jules Verne's books that he wrote. That all became reality. People thought it was fictional at the time. All of these books and movies had been made about the outbreak of viral diseases, bacterial diseases that are wiping out hundreds of millions of people. I'm telling you now, that is no longer reality. It is no longer fiction. Anatara has a potential answer. Not the panacea for all things, but it has a very important and probably world-leading position in this space in a natural alternative to antibiotics. In the use of mass use of antibiotics in livestock and in humans, we've created a significant problem for ourselves. So I just wanted to set that scene. The usual disclosure, because we're an ASX company. So listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, our ticker code ANR. Relatively small market cap compared to the potential for the company going forward, around just over 50 million. Current share price just a little bit above $1. However, and by the way, so I'm the chairman and the CEO, I'm the largest shareholder, so you've got a chairman and a CEO who has serious skin in the game, incentive to make this baby fly, and it will fly. So if you're an investor pre-IPO, we took pre-IPO investment, you'd be ecstatic. You would have made 4 to 5 times your money. Even if you invested in the IPO a couple of years ago, even though our share price has come off a little bit, you're still well over double your money in investment. So the shareholder base tends to be pretty happy campers. So let me get into the story of what we're doing here. So you see 3 photos at the bottom of this slide. So our focus, and I sometimes use the adage, the guts of the matter with Anatara, is we're focused on issues around gastrointestinal diseases or complications in both livestock, and I'll talk about moving into humans later. What we have, and this is the important value proposition with Anatara, is that we have a natural, safe alternative to antimicrobials, be they antibiotics, etc. And across a wide range of infections, viral, parasitic, bacteria, doesn't matter. You'll notice on the bottom left-hand side there, that's the root system of a pineapple. So not the pineapple, not the top of the pineapple, not the pineapple itself, because I've had comments about people say to me, well, you know, if I eat 5 pineapples a day, you know, well, I'll be okay, I'll fight off disease, or I'll treat disease. It's not. There is very trace elements in the pineapple, and don't let me discourage you from eating pineapples. In the root system, and this is, you know, like a lot of scientific breakthroughs, Pasteur, etc., there's a bit of serendipity here. It just so happens that my co-founder of the company, Dr. Tracy Minot, was working on potential treatments for diarrhea, and her mentor suggested that we look at, or she look at, enzymes and proteases extracted from plants. It is serendipity that she just happened to pick the pineapple as the first one. So not kiwi fruit, no, kiwi's okay. So what she found is not in the pineapple, but in the root system itself, and within a specific part of the root system, there is a whole series of enzymes and proteases which have unbelievable therapeutic properties to them, and we have a intellectual property or patent position around that. We go through a very sophisticated extraction process, but it's still a natural compound. In fact, regulators around the world have already acknowledged, so the US FDA, the European authorities, the Australian authorities have in writing verified that this is a safe compound, and does not create antimicrobial resistance, has applications to humans and of course our little friends the pigs, and we'll get into talking about pigs, people and pineapples. So, you know, there's, whether it's the World Health Organization based out of Geneva or the Centre for Disease Control in Colorado, and the list goes on, everyone acknowledges that this resistance, or antimicrobial resistance, that livestock and humans have built is the greatest and most urgent global risk. And that particular statement came out of the General Assembly of the United Nations only last year. So you can take this seriously. And it's from the overuse, you know, I've said it before, the overuse of antibiotics, mass use, particularly in agriculture. What a lot of people are quite surprised. So the assumption would normally be that the bulk of antibiotics that are used worldwide be used in humans. Incorrect. To 70% of antibiotics that are used, and just mass administration, is in livestock. And so we get to ingest that. So when you go to the supermarket or your local butcher, unfortunately, whether you like it or not, you're ingesting antibiotics, even if you're not taking antibiotics yourself. And they've been doing this for decades now. Even though livestock, and our primary focus is pork production, so pigs are our first market. We'll move on to humans, and I'll show you the connectivity there later. They just mass administer antibiotics as a growth promoter to, let's just focus on pigs, even though the animals may not be sick. And of course the animals end up getting sick because they've developed antimicrobial resistance. So that's the issue. So the prediction is, and I've seen predictions up to 50 million, so 10 million people are the number of people who will die every year due to antimicrobial resistance by 2050. I personally think that's grossly understated. There are other organisations, including the World Health Organization, that think that number will be closer to 50 million people. So it could be any of us sitting in this room. It's highly likely, and particularly they say these days, the most dangerous place that you can go is a hospital. And I'll give you a very good example that's close to home. So I'm a very long retired rugby player. The coach of the Queensland Reds, who I support, Bob Templeton, went into hospital, and he played for the Wallabies. Bob went into hospital to have knee reconstruction and never came home. He came home in a box because he picked up a strain of bacteria that they threw every cocktail of antibiotics at Bob, and they couldn't knock it off because it was antibiotic resistance. So, you know, that's it. And you know, if you look at the amount of capital in GDP, $100 trillion expected to be lost globally because of antimicrobial resistance, so it's a big issue. So let me move to pigs, and then I'll move to people, and then I'll shut up. So if you look at, and most people are happy about that last bit actually. So if you look, this is just, you don't need to focus too heavily on this slide. So our lead indication is to treat diarrhea and a whole range of diseases in pigs, starting with piglets. So the total number, that number at the bottom there, 1.6 billion, is not the number of pigs in the world. It's far higher than that. This is just the number of piglets that are born globally. And of those, up to 20% of those piglets do not make it to weaning, and they die from scour or diarrhea or infections, and that's where we come in with our lead compound. So if you're a pork producer, if you're a pig producer, as with any livestock, and in fact with any business, you're all about profitability. In the case of pigs, it's all about reducing mortality or death rate and increasing weight gain by pigs or livestock feeling healthy in their gut system and not carrying disease, and particularly not dying. So the market opportunity is interesting. This is where I talked about the stratosphere, because this is where the planets align for Anatara. We know that this is a major problem for livestock producers, particularly pork producers. I lost the plot there. It's all right, I'll just keep going. So what's happening? Oh yeah, so the planets, I'm back on track. The planets, I get ahead of myself, I've always been accused of that. So where the planets have collided here, this is a major issue for livestock producers, so in productivity. And the pork industry is really struggling at the moment. But where the pincer movement comes in, or the planets align for Anatara, is there's now enormous and growing consumer pressure to have antibiotic-free meat to eliminate this ridiculous practice. And I'm sorry if there's pork producers in the room who mass administer antibiotics. I don't do it for my animals. So there's enormous consumer pressure for, very safe food, and not to just continue to build this issue of antimicrobial resistance. If you look at the global antibiotic market, it's valued at around 4.6 billion. Of that, as I said before, 70% is used in livestock production, and of that, pigs lead that percentage by 25% of that is just used in pork. And this we validated when we did completed our prospectus independent legal review on this statement that pork, believe it or not, is the #1 consumed meat globally. I didn't even believe that myself at the time, because I assumed it would be chicken, most likely chicken, or maybe meat. I didn't think it would be pork. But then when it's explained to you, for example, China, Asia, Canada, particularly Europe, they're huge pork countries. And even was challenged by a few Americans on this statement. They said, in America, pork's no big deal. And I said, hang on. So for breakfast, do you ever have bacon? Oh, I love bacon. Oh, yeah, well, I love travelling. I always have bacon. So when you go to the deli and get a sandwich, what's your favourite meat? Oh, ham. Love ham. Ham and salad. It's fantastic. Good for you. I said, guess where those two come from? Where do you think bacon and ham come from? They go, oh, okay, right. So it is underestimated just how important pork is, and that's the reason Anatara is focused initially on solving this problem. And retailers are driving this change as well. So there's a couple of slides here that I'll move through very quickly. Largely being led out of the United States, but now moving to Australia and Europe, starting with McDonald's, and then you can see there's a whole range of companies that are well known, Subway, KFC, have come out and said, we want to buy antibiotic-free meat. Now, I appreciate that a lot of these companies are fast food companies, but they've led the charge. But you've got companies in the US, Tyson Foods, just massive retailer, have come out. They're all coming out now. We're seeing in Australia, you would have seen the Coles advertisements about hormone-free pork, stall-free pork, and there's a number of examples. I won't go through all of them. So there's a massive consumer push now to get antibiotics out of the system. So I'll talk about our lead compound, which we're starting with to focus on the significant issue in pigs or pork. One of the important things about our lead product, Detach, which will come to market starting next year, so we're not very far off. We've already lodged for regulatory approval, so we've completed the trials, all that money's been spent. The important thing about this is in therapeutic terms, we call it, it's got oral bioavailability. This is really, really important. So you can dissolve this in water, you can take it as a drink, or you can take it as a powder or in a tablet, which is what we'll be focused on for humans. So very easy to administer. Proven efficacy. This has been in literally tens of thousands, if not more, pigs in trials. Done safety studies up and down the yin-yang. We know it's absolutely safe because it's naturally extracted. It's broad-acting, so I spoke about this before. Bacteria, parasites, viruses, it's effective against. It's extremely stable. We end up with a white powder extracted out of the pineapple stem. Very stable at room temperature. and obviously delivers enormous economic benefits to livestock producers, particularly pork producers. And it's not just me saying this, there's been a lot of independent peer-reviewed articles published around this product in journals. We have a stand out here. I'm not sure where my commercial manager Hayley is. She's up the back there. So Hayley will be out in the stand. We've got material there. Please talk to Hayley. She's brighter than I am, and she can tell you about more about Anatara and the product. And Hayley can give you the link. Some of you may have seen ABC Landline did a piece on Anatara. We were just swamped. There was 220,000 people saw that program. It only runs for 12 minutes. Hayley can give you the link to that. I would encourage you to go and have a look, because it'll do a lot better explanation than me standing up here about what Anatara is all about. We will shortly, starting the end of June, the Australian Financial Review approached me to do a 3-part series around antimicrobial resistance, having identified it's such a huge global problem emerging. And they've asked if they can use Anatara as the lead commercial part of that story about combating antimicrobial resistance. So we've received a lot of press. We are ready for market entry. We have product bottles ready to go upon regulatory approval. We expect to launch Detach in Australia early 2018. We can then leverage off that Australian approval to move very quickly initially into the key Asian markets, which are much larger than the Australian market. We've got manufacturing nailed down. We know we can upscale this product very easily, so that's all running smoothly. And in fact, the Anatara team at the moment are now focused on doing market research, putting together promotional material ready for launch early next year. So the intention is to go ridiculously cash flow positive. And I said in the IPO, within 5 years of Anatara listing, my intention is to be returning capital to shareholders. Almost unheard of, Jeff would back me up here, almost unheard of for a biotech company to be returning capital to shareholders, apart from obviously CSL. But that's my focus. So what's next? There's a whole pipeline within these enzymes and proteases that we extract. We're starting work in not just the oral administration. We believe we can probably put it into livestock feed, which will be a real, fantastic breakthrough. We already know that we can put it into water because, as I said before, it's got oral bioavailability. And the focus that has already started now is we're moving, I think this is the slide. So there is also method in the madness about starting with pigs or pork production, because it's the #1 consumed meat. This issue of antimicrobial resistance and the mass administration of antibiotics is a huge issue. But there's a key part that a lot of people don't understand, is that the gut system of a pig is almost identical to the gut system of a human. So all of the work that other biotech companies spend on developing drugs and, moving through animal models, all the work that we have done in pigs translates, and the regulatory authorities around the world have given us validation on this, allows us to move very quickly into humans, again, for gut-related disorders. As an alternative to antibiotics, for example, traveller's diarrhea, I think there's around 50 million people a year travel. That's projected to double within the next decade. So you can see on the bottom there, we're very quick route to market and revenue and profitability just on pork. I mean, Anatara can go ridiculously cash flow positive just with Detach in pork alone. But if you look at the size of an egg, so that's the pork egg. If you have a look at the human applications, it's like that. And we intentionally are not going to go down the ridiculously expensive straight therapeutic route. Our intention is to be non-prescription, so you'd be able to buy this over the counter, so to speak, from a pharmacy or something, but it would be physician or GP recommended. So We are not interested in hokey-pokey stuff, you know, all the stuff you see in the health food shops, so, you know, trust me, this works. We will have clinically validated, non-prescription version of detach. That's our forward focus. We only recently opened a research laboratory in Melbourne. That's because some of our core collaborators are in Melbourne, and there's a very good base of some of the best scientists in Australia based out of Melbourne. It's a real hotbed for medical research. So that lab is up and running, fully kitted out and in full flight, working on the animal, continue to do some work on the livestock side, but primarily on the human side. I've talked about some of those statistics, so this is the last slide. We have put together a crackerjack board and management team, so we've got a fantastic executive team, all with extensive global commercial experience. We're very well funded. We've got a strong balance sheet. We don't need to go and raise capital. We've got a terrific pipeline. We're set to go, and that's the last slide. That's a statement from a review on antimicrobial resistance. I won't read it to you. I'll leave it there because it really just says what I've already said. Thank you.